Selena Rezvani, welcome to Partnering Leadership. I am thrilled to have you in this conversation with me.
Mahan, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
I can't wait to talk about your newest book, Quick Leadership: Build Trust, Navigate Change, and Cultivate Unstoppable Teams. Before we get to that, though, Selena, would love to know a little bit more about you. Whereabouts did you grow up, and how has your upbringing helped contribute to who you've become?
So I grew up in Philadelphia, and my upbringing had a lot to do with what I focus on today. I am the daughter of a pretty extreme workaholic, so much so that even though my dad was dealing with cardiac issues when I was a kid, he was an apparel executive. At one point, he was hospitalized. He checked himself out of the hospital against medical orders. And I watched him over the years look anxious and preoccupied on Sundays and Saturdays, not really be able to relax and be present on the weeknights at dinner. And wow, did that have an impact on me? My dad actually passed away young when I was 13. And when I tell you that my mission is to reduce suffering at work, to help people have healthy, sustainable careers, to lead in a way that you allow other people to have those healthy, sustainable, growth oriented careers. That's a big reason why.
What a beautiful, purpose driven story, Selena. One of the things I wonder as you were mentioning this, we tend to still glamorize overwork and overexhaustion. I don't think there's a day I look on LinkedIn where I don't see another quote or a statement, typically by a tech billionaire, that glamorizes 80 plus hours of work. Why do you think that is still such a prevalent part of our culture?
Yeah, you point out something rightly, which is that's been celebrated for many years. Whoever worked the longest swooped in and pulled off a turnaround that meant they traveled at the last second. Those are some of the things we've glorified. And when I go into organizations and I help them with their leadership, one of the things I ask them is, what are the hero stories around here? Because often in the places like you mentioned, like Silicon Valley, the hero stories are about grind and stamina for how far you can push things and push yourself. And that's something that can help people change the narrative within their organization. What if we celebrated a transformation or celebrated, person who's got the good boundaries, who's been an excellent manager in that way, for example, to others, whose role model, a sustainable, fulfilling, impact filled career. So I think that's an audit each of us can do. What do we celebrate? What heroes do we put forward? And how can we think critically about those important characters?
Couldn't agree with you more, Selena, in that what we celebrate, whether as a society or within the organization, is what we show is important and people seek that. One of the pushbacks that I get from some of the CEOs that I work with, even for those who are nonprofit CEOs, they say, you know what? I have a board of directors that I'm held accountable to. And therefore, while I would want to do this, I am measured by the metrics. And sure, we can celebrate some of these other elements, but we need to celebrate mostly the results that are delivered because that's what I'm measured on.
It's a fair pushback, and I think a common one too, a common pressure leaders feel that is put on them. But the way I see it and how I've been trained working at places like Great Place to Work Institute that evaluates the best places to work in the world is it's the difference between a short game approach and a long-term kind of benefit approach. And I think, sure, we can all say, go faster, do more in the short term. And we may see an uptick in production. That's not what's going to keep your employees around. And it's not what's going to build loyalty long term. It's not what's going to make someone say, I really see a future for myself here. Not to mention their best, most innovative ideas, because they're going to feel taken. They're going to feel like there's an imbalance in that employer-employee contract. That's very take on the part of the employer. So I say play the long game. When you treat people with compassion, human first, you are going to see the dividends. You truly will, in financials, in trust, in referrals to other good people.
It does make a huge difference. And you talk about the importance of that partnership, Selena. I couldn't agree with you more, which is why when I started the podcast, I called it Partnering Leadership. I
Yeah.
do think there has to be that partnership. At the same time, I'm hearing a lot of CEOs and executives complain about the new generation, Gen Z, and they say
Sure.
they don't have their priorities straight. They want to just come in, do their work during the hours they're getting paid, go home. So the expectations that they have of the newer generation is different. While I hear from the Gen Z employees, they are seeking the kind of leadership you are talking about. So, what do you
Mhm.
think is going to take to match those two, where we can start leading more the way you're talking about? And it sounds like many of the Gen Z employees are demanding of their employers.
Yeah. If you think about Gen Z, one of the biggest differences from somebody like me, who's a Gen X, is they grew up in a world that is highly participatory, right? Where they have a hand in shaping feedback, product input, all kinds of things. But participatory is really the main word. So when you then come into a workplace that is very command and control, do it because I said so. Maybe if you get promoted 3 times, then maybe you might have a voice slightly in the direction or the future of things. You can see why there's a real gap there and most likely going to lead to problems in communication and understanding. And so I think that's an important one. Is there a way for you to involve these junior workers in decisions that affect them? Doesn't mean you can't have or shouldn't have the final say, but remembering that point about being participatory. I think another thing that's different here is I think many of us, my generation and older, maybe even millennials, were raised to believe in a certain amount of deference to authority. I know my dad was from Pakistan, so he was very much about that in terms of my upbringing. Better to be seen than heard by adults. Some of us carry that into the workplace and we're quite deferential to the SVP in the room. Gen Z is not likely to do that. They will see that as a stiff, old fashioned ritual that does not have a purpose. And they're more likely to speak directly to you, peer to peer. And that takes some getting used to for people. I had one manager say to me, why do my Gen Zs talk to me like they're talking to a friend on a Saturday? Don't they get that I'm in a different category? I'm the manager. And understanding that, first, just having the awareness and being a little more peer to peer yourself, more egalitarian in your conversation, in your day to day, what I call power sharing, just human speak.
We need a lot more of that, Selena. And I think as a result of exponential technologies, most especially AI that is permeating all aspects of work, the best leaders will be able to tap into the collective intelligence of their teams and the group.
Mhm.
And therefore, it requires different leadership. So it's not just the fact that generations have different perspectives and views, but this is the kind of leadership that it takes for the organization to be able to thrive. Now, you've mentioned command and control. I would imagine most of my listeners, if not all, and most managers and CEOs, if you talk to them, they say, command and control, no, that's not me. That's not our organization. That's not the way we do things here. So why do you think people are still in a command and control structure? And what tells them that, you know what, maybe you should look in the mirror. Maybe this is not about others. Maybe it's about you.
Yeah, I tell people in any meeting at the healthiest workplace in the world or the most toxic, problematic one, there are power dynamics at play in a given meeting, right? There is no point at which an employee is not totally aware that you, their manager, control their paycheck, their career advancement and prospects, the day to day culture that they live in, how the rest of the organization sees them. And so employees know this. So the issue is they will often default to let the boss speak first, or the boss thinks that's a great direction, then probably safer to say yes and nod my head and agree. Right. So it really puts a burden on the manager or an excellent leader to go out of their way to make it okay to disagree. Right. That's the opposite of command and control. To debate for the sake of the best solution to the problem, to admit a mistake. And how do many of us get the courage to admit a mistake? Somebody higher than us has done it and role modeled it for us. They've made it okay and safe to do. So I think it's recognizing those power dynamics are almost always at play, even if you don't want to see yourself as a power monger type leader. And to realize the burden is really on you, the manager, to continue to make it safe and to make it that more egalitarian vibe and culture.
It's beautifully said, Selena, in that assume that you are not doing it well and
Yeah.
focus some energy and effort on it. Because in almost every instance, when I work with clients and have conversations, they say, oh, yeah, people are comfortable disagreeing with me. And they have an example of last week, someone disagreed with me in a meeting. That by itself is not an indicator of anything. When you are working with teams or organizations, what would you say are indicators of a healthy dynamic within those interactions and within the teams? So, at what point could the leader look around and say, you know what, we are close? We're never there, growth mindset, but we are close.
Yeah, I love that because there's only so much we can talk about lack and we don't have this. What are the signs we do have it? And that's such a constructive question. I think one of them is you see people raising concerns. I have a worry about what would happen if we implement that quickly. Would you like to hear it? Or can I raise it? The most important thing, though, is when someone does that, even if you, the manager, disagree, you see it as a non issue, you have a moment right then and there to say something like, I'm glad you raised that. I'm glad you're pushing us to think critically on this, whether or not you agree with the person's point. Okay, so what a great way to plant another seed that it's okay to push back here in service of the best idea, the best solution. So that's one. I have a concern. I'm uncomfortable with something about this. I think another sign is that leader is listening for the unsaid. So when there's that awkward, or sometimes what I call a pregnant pause, awkward silence, where you sense there's more to it, you unearth that. You take a moment to say the uncomfortable. Either this is like a terrible idea or it's the best idea all of you have ever heard because no one's saying a thing. It's a little too quiet. Or it's hard for me to believe everyone's perfectly aligned on this. Can we dig into it a little more? So I think that's a great perceptive sign that a leader is tuned in. And we need to be careful about this because some of these things cause a little dissonance in our brains. It feels much more comfortable to say, okay, great, everyone's cool with it. Let's wrap, we're done. That feels more natural, easier, more harmonious than if you grew up in a culture where you maybe wanted to make harmony, you felt uncomfortable with conflict, this might be trickier for you, but it is nourishing your team. It is creating this wonderfully safe, lush environment for your team to ideate. One more I want to share is I want to go out on a limb here. Somebody saying, I'd like to take a risk here and offer X perspective or hazard a really crazy guess at what I think could happen. Or this is one prediction that we might encounter. Um, what a sign of a healthy team. It's pretty rare. And I don't know if you see this in your own work, but it is not the norm. So, managers, you uniquely have the ability, and I talk about this in my book, Quick Leadership, to create that more than any other person in the organization.
Absolutely love the points that you made, Selena. First of all, I've heard a lot of managers ask about when someone contributes to the conversation, whether you should push back or not. Part of the point that you're making is that there is a difference between acknowledging their contribution and recognizing that contribution so you get more of it than necessarily agreeing with the point that is
That's
made.
right. And it's not false agreement or somehow you must see eye to eye. I think that's a really important point to underscore. Um, but so much can come from the way you reinforce that. One other thing I would say great leaders do with this is they'll say something that indicates they don't know it all. I really need your thoughts and ideas here, folks, because I don't have all the answers, or I want us to be as prepared as possible. You're pointing to the fact that I am not this oracle who knows it all.
A couple of other points that you mentioned, Selena, that I want to underline. You talk about silence and also looking for those nonverbal cues from the person as well. What I find is that we live in such a distracted world and our minds are rushing to so many different things that we miss the most obvious cues. So, one of the opportunities I have is sometimes sitting in on leadership team meetings and just watching people, and it's incredible without ever saying something how much you can learn. And more of us as leaders would do well if we use that silence to just pay attention.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And it can be scary at first if you're someone who was raised, I know I was, with this concept that means being the most authoritative and sometimes loudest in the room, probably talking the most in a meeting, having the most airtime. A lot of us grew up with pictures and symbols. That's what leadership is. It's being bulletproof and unflappable at all times. My thinking could not have evolved more on that. And silence is such a gift, not just to you, the leader, to be more reflective, to be more present in the moment and distraction free. But what a gift to your team to not feel like you're the parent that jumps in and solves every problem, gives the answer, rescues. How are they going to develop, right? How can they possibly think critically if we as managers are doing that? There's something wonderful to be said for showing some restraint. Sometimes it's silence. Sometimes it's a technique I share in the book is it's a little different than silence. It's called ask three before you solve. And it's simply that when someone brings you a problem in a team meeting or even a one-to-one, before you jump in and say, easy. Just do this with the client. You would ask them some questions to get them thinking, priming them to come up with a good solution. What have you tried so far with the client? And how has that worked for you? How did they receive that help or that interaction, that intervention? And again, you're getting them to go some layers deeper. So as my mom always told me, sometimes less is more. Sometimes you showing a little bit of that reserve, hanging back, allows you to be a better facilitator.
That's a wonderful way for us as leaders to view ourselves more as coaches rather than the holder of the answers. leadership has shifted, but will need to even more so. As I was mentioning to you, Selena, some of my conversations are with some of the smartest people on AI and where it's all headed. And I think very soon, the smartest team member on our team is going to be an AI agent with all the information and knowledge.
Mhm.
Therefore, the capability of the best leaders is not the knowledge and the information that they hold, but the questions that they ask from the entire group. Now, one of the things you also mentioned in the book that really clicked with me, you talk about the urgency culture, Selena, and we do have that. How can we counteract that need for urgency in leadership?
I know working at a big four company myself, I've experienced this where it was such the norm. It was so routine and week in, week out that it was not questioned so much anymore. And that's where I think we can get in trouble, whether we're talking about business strategy or the assumptions we operate with, where you just accept dogma, orthodoxies, and you don't even question norms anymore. It's a dangerous place to be. And I think with the way we spend our time, especially. So, what I encourage managers to do is first you have to notice that urgency culture. Boy, it seems like everything is due yesterday. 5 emergencies in quotes have landed in our lap this week. One of the best things you can do as a manager that your people will never forget, will appreciate so much, is what I call being the shit umbrella. And that is to rigorously vet the distractions, the projects that are coming in the door, the asks of your team. Hey, can they come and consult on this project? It's really time sensitive for us. No, they're head down right now, focused on something we need done by the end of the month. What a huge service that is, because I don't know if you've seen this in your work, but one of the worst brands, one of the worst labels you can have as a manager is spineless. They're nice, they're great, they're a good teacher, but when it comes to standing up for our team, they fold. Talk about a lack of respect and trust all at once. So I say prioritize ruthlessly as the manager. Don't be afraid to ask questions like, what's the real deadline? Because sometimes when people say it's Friday, actually it's not. There's 2 more weeks built in somewhere. Something else you can do, a simple thing, even once a quarter, audit a stop doing list for your team. Let me trim the fat here. Is there a recurring series we're part of where we're not adding value or we're not really mission critical to that? So have an eye towards pruning and be that blocker, that protector, block their focus time. Maybe you all would be suited in this sprint that you're on to take it off site. No emails, no meetings while you get this really important project over the line.
What a powerful way for that manager or leader of a team to add value in terms of being able to both block and prioritize focus on the most important things that need to get done. One of the books I love, Salida, is Subtract and was written by Leidy Klutz. He's a professor at UVA and talks about the fact that in all aspects of life, we tend to keep adding and see addition as a positive. And if
Yeah.
anything, that addition takes away from the power of the end result. You are emphasizing that, which I think is critical. You also mentioned that with respect to meetings, if there is anything that is driving people nuts, is all the meetings that are being scheduled. How can managers and leaders subtract and focus on what matters when it comes to meetings?
Wow, meetings, strong ceilings. When you ask people about meetings, I think one thing is a mindset shift. There's some practical things that matter. but one is a mindset shift. And I liked comic books my whole life. And so I think about Batman. When Batman wasn't solving a crime, rescuing, helping somebody, what was he doing? He was in the Batcave looking at maps, studying crime rates, looking at changes in Gotham City that were happening. And that was valuable strategic time. Every time, though, that signal goes off, what does he have to do? Drop everything and go attend to it. And I tell managers, your people are a little bit like that. Every time you set a meeting, you are issuing a bat signal that says, drop everything and come convene over here. Talk about this. And oftentimes we associate meetings with things of importance, but you've got to bring that discerning, is this distraction? And calling it that, because sometimes it truly is that. Is this distraction worthy of pulling them out of their deep strategy work or most innovative thinking type work? So be discerning, err on the side of fewer, not more. That's that protective shield mindset of I'm going to protect their time and my time. I would say set those really clear intentions. Never have a meeting where someone's wondering, why am I here? What possibly could be my role or value add to this meeting? You've made it clear, I'm asking you, give us input on XYZ, or to make the decision on ABC. People talking in the first 5 minutes. If you want a quality meeting and people drop things to be there, what we find is if people speak multiple voices in the first 5 minutes, you're likelier to have that breadth and diversity of voices carry through. If it's a monologue, with, again, often the leader, you're less likely to have that. So a simple thing you can do is rotate leadership of the meeting, slice up, divvy up the agenda so that there's people get used to different speaking voices and roles. And I think those are some of the things. I think you're recognizing you as a manager and your people, it is okay to be selectively excellent. There's no such thing as excellent all the time. And by pruning those meetings, you're going to unleash more of that excellence and presence when they do show up.
I love the analogy of the bat signal in that, in essence, it says drop everything because it's a block on people's schedules. Drop everything to be here because it's important. And a lot of them are a waste of time. People might not say it. They're a waste of time, whether they are updates or things that could have been shared otherwise. So you are saying focus on selective excellence. And you mentioned that in the book also. I want to understand, how does selective excellence differ from perfectionism? I want everything to be done right and well.
So selective excellence recognizes that you and I and any other human being on earth have finite resources in a day. We do not have just replenishing, regenerating, never-ending resources. And there's only so much we can take ourselves into the red before we experience things like burnout. So what I love about the concept of selective excellence is that you are discerning, where can I give pretty good performance? Maybe that's some of your admin tasks. Maybe that's preparing your travel invoices, creating an outline for something fairly routine. That may be very different from a sensitive personnel issue you need to deal with, where you really are trying to think creatively on a solution and you want to bring that excellence. Maybe you have a senior leadership meeting and a lot is riding on it. You might really make a point to bring your excellence to that. So it's recognizing you've got this finite energy. Every day you make decisions that create these withdrawals in what you have and deposits. And so it's up to you to manage that account and say, what is realistic here for me to not tell myself I have to do everything flawlessly, perfectly 10 out of 10. It's just not realistic. And believe me, I tried all through my 20s and 30s. I tried to be perfect at everything. And guess what? It sets you up to feel like a failure, right? Because who can meet that bar? So striving for excellence, for very good, is a freeing, liberating thing. And it will be for your people too, when you permeate that thinking.
It is really challenging, though, Selena. It requires some real deep thinking and work. So I wonder, how do you guide leaders to do that?
I think one question to ask leaders is what is closely tied to your why, your team's why for being, for existing? What is that? Most likely there is a mission critical project or relationship or set of relationships. And often that's what needs your best and most focus. I think, though, again, we have this human desire to go on default, to want this to be autopilot. Can't I just do this intuitively or without deep thought and scheduling a meeting with myself? But we need to consider the fact that this requires some time and reflection at the beginning of our week. What's really tied to my why this week? Why we're here? Why we make an impact? Often that's where the gold is. Okay. On the other hand, what is something that's maybe routine, a system, a task that needs to get done, but does not require flawless 10 out of 10 execution? You will almost always find some of both, not everything in one urgent bucket.
I find when leaders take the time to reflect on that, it helps them make decisions ahead of time and it reduces some of the cognitive load as they have a lot of things coming at them. The same way you were mentioning, Selena, you have to filter what gets to your team. You also have to be selective and filter what gets to you. Otherwise, we're going to be running around trying to get everything done and not having what you mentioned is that selective excellence. Where is our time, our focus, our energy as an individual, and then as a team most impactful to the why of the organization? It requires some thought and planning ahead of time to be able to deliver on that.
I think you're right. And some backbone, because I have a coachee I've worked with in the past who had a really hard time setting boundaries around people's requests of his time, afraid that maybe he'd look irrelevant, like he wasn't doing enough if he didn't do that. And yet, the thing is, people often respect you more when you say no, when you have some limits, when I said to him at one point, do you want to be known as a 24/7 like convenience stop? Is that really what you want to be known for? Because I don't think it's 24/7 access that's your claim to fame and your greatest gift. Um, People can accept limits, but it's really up to us to introduce them and say, I would like to meet with you and having some open office hours on Friday from 12 to 2. Please come then.
That requires a lot of discipline and that willingness to say no as well. Now, one of the other things that you go into in your book as well, Selena, that I find a lot of managers have difficulty with is giving and soliciting feedback. So, what are the feedback rituals or routines that you see working consistently over time?
If you might indulge me, I would love to just share one don't do that's come up a lot in the news lately. And it's about this concept of quiet firing, where sometimes in avoidant cultures, where there's not a lot of direct communication, you hint that the person is not a great fit in their role or in the organization. And it can be passive aggressive, right? You're just cutting them out of meetings they used to be part of or lead. You're giving them a quiet demotion. You're no longer consulting them on things. Often we see people don't have career conversations any longer with this person about the future. That is the opposite of people first leadership. Knowing where you stand should be such a basic requirement and expectation for anyone in a workplace, and getting the truth, about where you stand. So that's what we don't want to do in terms of creating a feedback culture. So you're not just a lone hero doing this well in your workplace, but you're permeating this more. Create that coaching culture. So, for example, if we're in a team meeting, somebody's getting ready to give an important presentation next week, you might turn to the group and say, does anyone have some input for so and you as a team give a presentation? Several of you are there. Let's pause before we carry forward and give some group feedback on how we think that went. So small things you can do to just normalize feedback giving on your team, whether it's a teammate to a teammate or you as a group sitting down and hashing it out. I think the other thing is I encourage the leaders I coach to go from formal and rare to informal and casual, because there's something extra awkward, isn't there, when it's so rare that we talk about this and we're using a form that feels very perfunctory to fill out. And it really does feel like this odd ritual. It's not quite real talk. So if you can incorporate that real talk, even baking it into your one-to-ones that you have continuously, is there even one piece of feedback I can offer this person to start, stop, continue? And to do it with precision and specificity so that person, especially if it's a good thing, can repeat that behavior. The worst thing we can do is say something like, nice job in there. Right. So I also teach this concept of when you catch yourself doing that, because many of us do that just by default, mentally put a colon after that and explain yourself. So if you say, nice job in there, you might say, I've noticed you caught a lot of errors that really helped us pull off a polished final presentation. Thank you for that. It really positioned us better. No one should walk away with any kind of opaqueness about what the feedback is. And we talked about the importance of silence. You can also have the person play it back just for the sake of clarity and understanding. I'd love to hear your recap of what you heard today in our discussion.
It's really important, Selena, that it's done and it's done well. I love the way you put it rather than formal and rare, make it informal and frequent. One of the concerns that I hear consistently in organizations, including with people who are senior executives in relation to the CEO, they don't know where they stand. And if anyone in the organization feels like they don't know where they stand, to your first point, it's lacking humanity if you are sending them signals without being clear with them. But in many instances, it's because the leader has not taken the time to do those one on ones, or thinks saying good job at the end of a meeting is giving feedback. And it's not. So if there is one thing we need to do more frequently and better, is that consistent feedback. Everyone on the team knows where they stand. People appreciate that. The worst thing is not knowing where you stand or being blindsided.
Absolutely. Talk about something unsteadying to be completely surprised and taken off guard. So I agree with you. What a gift, but a rare gift today to truly feel like I know where I stand. We have a shared perspective on how I'm doing. And you can do this, managers. Again, it doesn't have to be weird and awkward, I promise. You can also ask people for their thoughts on the feedback. It's not like it needs to be you with a judge with a gavel, right? It can be a two-way conversation. This is how I see it. and what I observed last Tuesday. What did you notice? What did you pick up? And you can do that, right? Managers know how to have those two-way conversations. And it's the same here.
I encourage once a week or once every 2 weeks, those one on ones, and they can be short, focused on these coaching conversations. I know there are some managers who get away without regular one on ones. They say we bump into each other all the time and talk all the time. I personally don't think that's enough because when you have a structured one on one, it forces you ahead of time to think about some of the feedback, how you are going to give it, and it helps with the relationship.
I really agree with you. And I think in the worst case, and I hear this a decent amount in coaching and consulting, a manager is constantly canceling. So they're there, they're on the schedule, but the manager is saying, gotta bump it. What is the shorthand for that is I have something important. You're not it. I have something important to attend to. And so I couldn't agree more with you that these are like a basic foundation to keep your communication open, to keep working on a no surprise basis with each other, to do temperature checks with your employee and see how they're doing. And I think one of the reasons that's so important to keep the communication loop open, there was a UKG study, and I don't know if you saw this, but it really, wow, packed a punch. And it said that the majority of employees say that their manager influences their mental health on par with the impact of their spouse and
Wow.
more than the impact of their doctors or their therapist. So when you realize what a disproportionate role you have in this individual's day-to-day mental health, it is something you can do to meet week in and week out. And I like to say, start with a human question. Before we get down to business today, how's your energy? Right? It doesn't have to be a deeply personal, confessional, tell me your darkest secrets type of question. Not at all. It could be just what I described, something getting a broad temperature check on how they're doing. Or maybe you know that they've had a particularly stressful sprint or stretch they've been on, mentioning that and checking in there first. There's some great data to show that employees who feel checked in on a personal level are far more engaged and have better performance outcomes. So not just a nice thing to do, but truly something that's going to be felt in multiple ways. So I think that's really important.
For many of us, I know me included, the best managers and leaders we've had have had a significant impact on us, not just in how we work, but our confidence, our view of ourselves, the role we can play, impact we can have. So it's an awesome responsibility and also an opportunity, which is why I appreciate your insights, Selena, because they can help all of us become the kind of managers and leaders that I know many of us aspire to be. So, for the audience to both find out more about your book, Quick Leadership, and follow your work, where would you send them, Selena?
I would love for you all to check out Quick Leadership. You can buy the book anywhere books are sold. And you can find me on selenarezvani.com and at Selena Rezvani on all the social media platforms where I make leadership videos 5 days a week. So I'd love to hear your input, your feedback, and say hello there.
Really appreciate your insights, Selena, and your book, Quick Leadership: Build Trust, Navigate Change, and Cultivate Unstoppable Teams. Thank you so much for joining me in this conversation, Selena Rezvani.
Thank you so much, and congrats on the success of this podcast. It's awesome.